Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. خیلی جوری تازه تکره خدا کنه خوب باشین جور باشین. It may sound a bit weird going on 2 hours of sleep hardly. But yeah, this is very important. Really looking forward to this. I've been really waiting to do this. I'm actually honored to have these two beautiful Afghans come in and talk about this and the hard work that they've done for a very long time on this subject. The decolonial therapy. What is it and why is it so important? That we will know very shortly from their mouth. I'm not really qualified to talk about this because this has taken a pretty intense and in-depth research, and it's a very interesting and fundamental concept for all of us Afghans, especially the young generation today, and for tomorrow, and after that, for us everyone to know about this and to be aware, because this is actually the basis of, or I should say one of the fundamental problems that we have in Afghanistan among our people, to recognize and understand and be aware of our true history, not the whitewashed, not the mouth-to-mouth, mouth-to-ear I should say, but the true history of the atrocities which has been committed by so-called the majority or powerful or whatever you want to call it, tribes or ethnicities. So we're gonna go really in depth with this, and hopefully my friends and very qualified and experts in the subject matter today, at least as far as I know, they will be talking to us about that. So yeah, we're gonna have Bakhair. Okay, we have Shamayel first.
Salam.
Assalamu alaikum.
How's it going?
How are you?
I'm all right.
Good. How are you?
I'm good.
Look at you.
How
Look at you showing off your hair. What's up? What's
What?
up? This is the first time we can actually see your hair. Oh, salam alaikum. Afghanistan night angle.
She's awake.
Yes,
She's awake. The bulbul is awake. What?
of course, for you guys, anything.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very, very much. Nice to have you ladies here. Thank you for coming on. Shamayel Jan left the building.
She's on her Tashkent Wi-Fi right now.
Oh.
I just got your text message. I do have the decolonial document. Do you want it?
Yeah, it would be nice to see it as like a reference.
Actually, I have no way of giving it to you because I'm on the phone.
Okay, that's fine. I'll try to remember what was on it.
I can get out of I can get out of this live and send it to you. But if you have access to your computer and you have WhatsApp on your computer, you can hit WhatsApp and go into the links. You had to send me this document once, so the link is there.
Okay. Okay, I think I saw it.
I memorized way too much shit. Listen, very quickly, Lemar.
Yes.
Happy that you have your nose ring in.
Happy that I have my nose ring again. Thank you very much. Yes. I'm happy as well. This just motivates me.
Do you want the story of why I'm saying that? No.
Well, people might want to know. They have the right to know. Tell them.
Right to know. What did you say today?
They have.
questions, like good responses need the patience or something like that.
Yes.
That was
Yes.
well. So that's for your nose ring too.
Fair enough. Oh, all right.
All right.
First of all, what happened to the nature of bulbuls that they have now started to wake up late? What's up? Is it the winter or
It's global warming, climate.
it's global warming?
Yeah.
Fair enough. That's it. We were actually speaking about Danzig, and Shamayel John said that they're a bit weird because of their whole sort of weird cult belief in veganism.
Like he got like he got too into the I'm vegan and I need to make a vegan too kind of idea. He got like too into that.
I mean, I tried being vegan and vegetarian, but my Afghan genes are like, nope. Like, you guys are like,
yeah,
no, don't worry. You're from,
you have to hit people, which is not worth it.
Yeah, actually,
you're around a lot of
I
white
did.
people too when you're in like the vegan culture.
I did try to live pure vegetarian life whenever I was traveling outside Afghanistan because I was only looking for halal meat, and I really didn't have much issues. I did crave eating meat, and I used to go and find these specific halal places and then to eat. I think the longest I went without eating meat outside, I think it was in Australia for a couple of years or something. I used to just eat at home, and obviously it's not healthy to eat every day. Anyways, but
also
that reminded me.
Ain't nobody.
What was that?
Oh, I'm so delayed. Sorry, I'm so delayed compared to you guys. My internet's so. I was just saying that if you're in the West, best not to eat the meat. That's a pretty easy place to be a vegetarian because like who the fuck trusts Western meat? You can buy a whole ass for like 80 cents. That's creepy.
Yeah, it tastes like cardboard. The chicken, especially.
We're gonna just end up for the whole life.
How about me?
Like,
no, no, we're not gonna do that. But why I did brought this up because there's another sort of a cult called the Breatharians. Have you heard about that? The Breatharians, who apparently just live on breathing, the breathing practices for a very long time. I mean, there are a lot of documentaries about them, and they all practice these yoga techniques and whatnot, and they just live on air. Like that's the simple way to say it. So I was thinking, I never really believed it until now because our people in Afghanistan, 30+ million people are actually living on this air. They're just breathing and hoping to live. So I think that's a good one as well to remember to all our friends who are trying to do everything but to feed our own people. Okay, let's get into the decolonial therapy, the final episode. I'm pretty excited. So who wants to go first with telling us quickly about what is it?
I've called it the final chapter for the past 5 chapters. I've been like, it's the last one. We're not going to do it more. It's the last one. But we have taken, so for anyone who hasn't looked at it, please do look at it because me and Aisha spent a very obscene amount of time on documenting the entire history of pretty much since Afghanistan became a nation state. And yeah, there's a few things that we didn't cover, but we were making a point. And we took it all the way to 9/11. Maybe we should go into 9/11 a little bit, but for us, it seemed like if you're Afghan and if you have any love for your country, like, 9/11 was an inside job, and we don't need to walk you through that because that's why everything's happening, right? So once we got there, we said that that was the end. But what ended up happening was after August, or even prior to August, it was before August, we decided to do a little aftermath and talk about identity just in general and why we even did this whole thing, right? Because knowing your history correlates to knowing yourself and being of better service to Afghanistan. That's the point. Since the beginning of decolonial therapy, I think me and Aisha have and in our personal life, always talked about how we just keep repeating the same mistakes over and over again as Afghans, over and over again. So when we did a little thing on identity and it had to do with religion and Afghanness, like, are you Afghan first or your religion first, which I think is a very important conversation. Then we started talking about, well, let's discuss how this repetition of history, what it means, and actually give some tangible solutions to what we can do. It's a lot to just read books about history or Instagram slides about history, but it's another thing to kind of start putting it inside you in a way that you can do something for Afghanistan. That's the point.
Exactly. Beautifully said. Okay. So where are we gonna start from? You gonna give us a brief intro about what you guys have done till today? Then we take it from there, or
You don't want to ask us the questions?
as if you were just waiting for that?
Today I'm right.
No. Are you? Oh, damn.
Okay.
Okay, now today you've got the mic, you've got the spotlight, you two, because this is a very broad subject, and I think I want to give every moment of this session that we are doing only dedicated to that subject. So maybe I'll just skip that part of the rapid fire round because you two are on fire anyways at all times. Not just because you two look beautiful, but because of how much you know and how much you have to say. So let's just get into it with a bang, full on pedal to the metal.
Okay.
Okay.
There are certain things that, like, I feel like I'm talking a little bit too much about this in an abstract way, but even a person who doesn't know the ins and outs of Afghan history, can you see that there's a repetition of history? And I'm going to ask you this, Lamad, to answer. Like, for one moment, I'll acknowledge you as what you always want to be called, which is Beisawa, you don't know anything. So would you say you can see how history has repeated itself in Afghanistan?
Definitely. You don't need sawad for that. You need to have lived and see.
Yeah.
You know, if you've had out of all your senses, even 2 senses of them, either you could hear or look, feel, talk, you know that their history has repeated itself. Sure, it has just copied and pasted.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things that are repeating in Afghanistan's history. I think it's sort of a repetition of what you see in terms of Afghanistan, progressing a little bit, and then the rural population, for example, they're usually used as like instruments to revolt against that progression because they're brainwashed to think that it's not Islamic. This happened before too. Like, for example, if you look at history during Amanullah Khan's time, like, Amanullah Khan wasn't, he did try to progress Afghanistan. He did have his faults, but there's always been a problem in Afghanistan with the mullahs, because they oftentimes actually, if you look at history, a lot of the mullahs would actually get money from the West, even the British back in the day. And then they would use that money because, you know, the British would tell them, oh, we'll give you money and you have to, you know, start a Islamic revolt, like a jihad, you know. And this was also done by the Mughals. They're the ones that actually first started it. Abdul Ghaffar Khan actually talks about this in his book. So the Mughals would oftentimes use mullahs to cause tension in Afghanistan, and you know, and then the British learned from the Mughals, and this has been continuing to this day. Yeah. Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
No, finish your thought.
Yeah, so that's the, you know, there is a difference. Even if you look at the West, their history, the Catholic Church has sort of a similar history where it has used religion for its own political means, and usually the priests have been very corrupt, and you see the same thing happening here in Afghanistan, you know. And we have to be very clear when it comes to how we interpret our religion. Why are we listening, you know, learning about our religion, learning about God through the mouth, through the voice of somebody else, instead of directly connecting with God? And, you know, like, that's why Sufism, like the indigenous form of Islam, is so beautiful, because it tells you to connect to God directly instead of through listening to someone else's voice, you know. And Afghans, even Abdul Ghaffar Khan talks about this. In his book, he talks about how, because we are people who, even the ones who think they're not religious or atheists, they claim they're atheistic, but deep down, like innately, we are a very, you know, not religious, but a spiritual people. We have a lot of faith in God, whatever that means to you. Even I've never met an Afghan, even the ones who claim they're atheists, you know, like you can tell deep down they still have that connection to God. And that has been exploited, you know, historically by the West, by all the, you know, invading forces that have come to Afghanistan, and it's still being exploited until now. You know, Abdul Ghaffar Khan talks about the temperament of an Afghan. We are extremely loyal, you know, very fierce people. And at the same time, we're sada. And that sada isn't because we're stupid, but it's because we are a people who, unlike other people, like, for example, the British, we don't really hide things. We are what you see, you know what I mean? And our nature gets exploited because of that. We have to become more aware of how we get exploited, you know what I mean? And that's happening right now. Like, it happened with Amanullah Khan and Bache Sakau. It happened, the first time it happened was actually with Pir Roshan. He was actually one of the first, this was back during the Mughal times, and I don't know if you guys know about it, but the Illuminati movement, some people think it's about a secret group controlling the world. That's not actually what it was, but it was like philosophers, scientists coming together in order to find illumination. And that actually started in Afghanistan. Pir Roshan, the reason why he's called Roshan is because he created the Roshaniya movement, which later Bavarian Freemasons were inspired by it, and that's why they call it Illuminati, because it was Roshaniya, Roshan, you know, like light. And he was a feminist, a socialist. If he was born today, he would be, you know, very left-wing. And interestingly, he was actually Urmari, which is part of the Tajik. It came under the Tajik umbrella, but he actually created the Pashto alphabet and made Pashto a written language because he wanted Pashtuns to become literate. So it just goes to show how the ethnicities in Afghanistan, back during that time, there was not this kind of ethnic tension. Even the Pashtun Renaissance movement was actually created by a Tajik. So it's interesting when we look at history, you know, when you hear Joe Biden saying shit like, oh, Afghans have never gotten along, they've been like this forever. That's not true. You know, that's just how the colonists, they do this all the time. When they fuck up a country, then they victimize the people and say, oh, it's because of you, you know, and they use their divide and conquer strategy in order to do that. And what I find alarming, sorry, I'm going on and on. What I find, yeah, what I find alarming right now is that Afghans are actually believing that myth. Even though Pashtun supremacy has existed, we have to remember in the span of Afghanistan's history, it's a relatively short phenomenon. You know, like it happened when imperialism was peaking, and, you know, British imperialism created it. But previous to that, it was not a thing. In Afghanistan, ethnic tension like that did not exist, and we have to remember that. We at one point did get along. At one point we all came together to fight against the Mughals, you know, the British. We have to remember that we were not always like this, and we shouldn't see ourselves, see our people and our country through the white man's perspective. You know, all this Kambazi stuff, this is new. It wasn't, did not exist before British imperialism in Afghanistan. And, you know, you have to remember, even Ahmad Shah Durrani, a lot of Pashtun supremacists see him as, like, you know, this Pashtun leader. He was not a leader for just Pashtuns. In fact, he was crowned king by a Farsi Zuban, by a Tajik, because everybody, you know, back then, we have to remember nation states are a new idea. Back then, people didn't fight because of the ethnicity that they were from. They fought for ideologies like freedom, liberty, and so on. So we have to remember that even the founding of Ahmad Shah Baba, when he founded this country, it wasn't founded on the basis of an ethnic state. You know, it was different back then. And right now, a lot of people are warping history, and they're not realizing that back then things were different, you know. So yeah, does that you feel like I keep going on, but it's just really, I mean, I keep talking about this all the time, but it feels like Afghans are so attached to this false narrative of their history that they're not able to look at it more objectively.
Shamal John, I think you've got something to say.
Well, you just brought up many great things and great examples. Like, I don't even know where to begin in response to everything you said. The being used against us, I think I talked. Well, if you,
Shamal John, you're breaking up. You're breaking up. Yeah, your internet is really bad. Really bad. There you go. Now we know. Everyone knows this is a very bad promotion for the Uzbeki internet. But until Shamal John comes back, I'm so surprised and glad to know about this whole thing that I knew about the Illuminati starting or kind of coming from Bavaria and all that European countries. I honestly had no idea that it actually started in Afghanistan, and it makes a lot of sense because a lot of if we could go really in depth with this whole Illuminati or the secret society culture, and the little that I've read about them, and even they had their own spiritual side as well, with their whole literature and philosophical and all those other beliefs and practices. They had their own spiritual practices as well. And it makes a lot of sense that it should have originated in a country or land or region like Afghanistan, specifically because of that spiritual belief. And what you were saying, out of a lot of those interesting points, I think maybe we could go in depth later on as we go along into this specific details. So when we say that this whole ethnical rivalry or the awareness or the recognition for ethnicities and the fight for it's never existed, I'm really keen to know what actually binded us. Was it just the fate of living together on a land, or was it just humanity, or was it just so maybe not generally practiced, but was it the religion mainly? Did there have to be something which binded us? Maybe you could give some more insight into that.
Okay, so
One
of the things that I want to touch on is that when it comes to Afghanistan, we have a misconception about our origin, the origin stories of a lot of the ethnic groups. For example, in Afghanistan, we have this idea that, Tajiks are like Iranians, they're Persians. Meanwhile, Pashtuns are different. But if you look at the origin of both of these groups, for example, the Tajiks actually were originally speaking languages that were sister languages to Pashto. Only, later on, after Muslim missionaries from Iran went to Afghanistan and they converted, the settled population, which are now Tajiks, the urban population, to Islam. And during that time, when the conversions were happening, all of these people, the Bactrians, the Sogdians, they all spoke languages similar to Pashto. They started adopting Farsi instead. And the modern day Farsi that we speak is kind of a result of that, because it was a merging of these East Iranic languages like Bactrian and so on with Old Persian, and then that created the Farsi that we speak today. So if you actually were to, oh, hi, you're back.
Yeah, wouldn't allow her in, and I had to invite her back.
This is so annoying.
Hopefully,
I feel like it's not my internet, and it's the stupid, dumb VPN I'm using.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Ugh.
Okay.
Well,
now you're here. Okay, maybe you are just too big of a personality that you can't fit in a three-way live session. You just need your own space.
No, it's because I'm being silenced. Instagram is silencing me. Because can I just jump right in and go back to what I was saying, if that's possible?
Yeah, go for it.
Thank you. Okay, so I talk about this a lot, and if what I'm about to say to you doesn't make sense, then come and look at this in like 5 years. The point of being on Earth is to grow and to learn and to heal and to help others. That is the point, right? When you have cycles that repeat themselves, you are redoing this traumatic cycle. You're redoing this trauma. You're acting from a place of trauma, and you do it again, et cetera, et cetera. Until you break that cycle, you're not actually learning that lesson. So when we have 300, and this is abstract, when you have 300 years of doing, since we become a nation state, which is problematic in and of itself, because it seems like a lot of things that we have problems with right now, we did it back then. And you can say things like other people, certain people coming into our lands, money, the Industrial Revolution, capitalism, really didn't sit well with our people. That's kind of the underbelly. But when you have 300 years of repeating the same cycle, and as we know, everyone is obsessed with the tragedy of Afghanistan, especially in the past 40 years. So if it's very obvious that we have issues and we're not fixing it, we're going to just keep doing the same thing over and over again until we break the cycle. Like you mentioned, Aisha, how many times have just not even the countryside at large, KPK Pashtuns been used to do whatever anyone wants? From Taliban to fucking our monarchs use them to fight and then sold them out during partition. Like, what? No wonder there's so many problems. Do you really think that it doesn't make sense that later, you would get those kids becoming talibs or being at risk of becoming talibs and coming fighting Afghanistan? Afghanistan helped destroy their lives and made them part of fucking a colonial Pakistan. Do you know what I mean? So all of our bad shit and the cycles we repeat just bites us in the ass. So our prescription to this kind of stuff is not only learn it, but have some kind of acceptance of it to go forward. So if Afghans, no matter where they are, and some of them aren't like this, but a lot of them are, especially nowadays, love throwing this, I'm so anti-American imperialism. Oh, anything Americaicas, that's bad. Okay, so then why are you selling out your country for American dollars? Like, why are you letting the British divide and conquer, divide us not by ethnic groups only, by religion too? Like, and even by ideology. There's like, there's ways that can play out, like people being like, I'm conservative in general, it's wrong anyone else. The divide and conquer thing is literally killing ourselves. So I don't know if any of that made sense, but you shouldn't be that surprised that someone 200 years ago sold us out to the British, and then we have a ruler today that fucked off to Dubai with all this million. That makes perfect sense to me. Because we haven't healed that fucking thing.
Yeah. You know, this has been happening for centuries, and, you know, it's problematic just because I think Afghans all know deep down that this has been happening, but they're not actually doing anything about it. And I think the problems really start from the home. You know, like when I look at Afghan families, they always have problems with their own siblings. Even in Pashto, you know, the word for cousin and enemy is the same thing. It's called tarbur. You know, like, you know, we don't look at our own relatives, our own family, as allies, as people who support us. We, as soon as someone becomes your cousin, and you know, they're called tarbur, you know, which means it means both enemy and cousin. And I find that very metaphorical about our mindset. You know, it really shows how we have this khudkush, big on a paras mentality.
But at the same time, we do have another saying which says that "Bad qawm bosh be qawm ne." I think.
Yeah, I think it's because
Yeah,
the problem I see in our culture is, well, we're simultaneously fiercely loyal. You know, we have stuff like if someone is, you know, hurt or they need your help, you know, and they ask for your hospitality, you're supposed to give it to them. But at the same time, we are extremely like paranoid about our own family members. How many of us hide our true selves from, you know, our aunts or uncles?
Well, I think it does perhaps relate, especially when you come when you look at tribal areas, tribal lifestyle, right? Now, because Shamayel John mentioned something very beautifully the other night on our live, was that we are a country of farmers, right? So just like our neighboring countries, the land itself, the farming land, it's a very important thing in our lives. It's considered ghairat, not just for us, for Indians, for all that southern part of Asia at least, and I'm pretty sure there could be others as well. But so, and as we all know, when you are a tribal family, the land that gets sort of distributed at some point of time as per the rights in the family. And I think when you talk about the cousins and the term being synonymous with enemy, I think maybe that comes from there, if I'm not mistaken, because almost all the time, even in my own family, we have troubles with our uncles and cousins because of land, you know? So do you think perhaps the origin of this whole history cycle repeating itself, and why did we come from a point where we never really were ethnic based nation, but something did bind us together to this point? Does it has to do specifically with our own self-made traditions, or was it always some sort of a conflict which was injected by the West, be it the name of religion or be it some sort of other conspiracy made?
So the idea of a nation founded on a shared ethnicity and language is actually a Western idea, you know, and it's actually previous in history. That is not why people were part of the same country, especially if you look at you know, the Middle East, Afghanistan, these areas. Our whole problems now are because we think that a country's narrative has to be based on, you know, a shared ethnicity, a shared language, but that was not the case before. And that's why, for example, you see populations like Kurds. There's even Kurds in Afghanistan all the way up to Syria, Iraq. It's back then people did not see borders as this like rigid thing, you know. They would move around in these areas. Yeah. You were saying something, Shamayel?
So just I want to quickly that if you look at and those time periods when we didn't have nation states on a general level is when we did a lot of very fantastic things, because the more you're exposed, the more your mind opens, right? Like when there was empires and dynasties that there was Bactrian being spoken in the same place as this other language and this other language. We're in old lands. Like maybe what held us together was not just anything outside of the land and having ancestors and ancestors who went back through that land. But we have to remember that this is one of the things about Afghanistan that we should be using for our benefit as opposed to our harm, which is that we're diverse. And that's an excellent thing. Like the renaissance of Islamic empires, everyone still wanks themselves off to Rumi. We talked about this in the last live. All of the mathematicians at that time, all of the scientists, all like constantly. But those people spoke like 8 languages because the empire was so big and there was so many different ethnic groups. Why did we have that renaissance? Does it have anything to do with diversity? I would say, yeah, totally.
Yeah, definitely. And like, for example, Rumi was, you know, he was a Farsi Zaban from like an Iranic background. Meanwhile, Shams was actually Turkic. And in a lot of his poems, he describes Shams' features as, you know, having almond eyes and things like that. And, you know, it wasn't the whole idea of, you know, focusing so much on other people's appearances, like whether they look more East Asian or European or whatever, like that is what, you know, it's colonization. Like back in the day, people didn't really care about that kind of stuff in our region.
So those people who at some point, and even nowadays, they really chant and they really want to start this whole conversation about Afghanistan being a decentralized nation. So maybe perhaps it's more divided into states, into independent states, and blah, blah, blah. Listening to you two right now, I mean, I did believe that it was never a good idea, but this makes me even more sure that that is not a good idea. Am I right about that?
So
I think,
actually, Afghanistan, back when it was prospering, it was decentralized because a
yeah.
country with so many diverse people, you know, with diverse customs, it makes sense for every area to sort of have people from it representing their voice, right? And centralization is never works in countries with extreme diversity because it enforces a narrative of everyone being kind of the same, but that's not the case, right?
It has to use, it has to do this like weird umbrella unification thing that people outside of it, or values outside of it, or customs outside of it, start getting pushed out. You know what I mean? If part of rural parts of Afghanistan didn't want their kids, they didn't want their kids to go to school, specifically their daughters, but another part did, why should there be a law on top of everyone that they can't go to school? You know, like, and then that way each person or peoples would be more happier because how they're being represented is centered in the decentralization. I feel like this is a political thought, like this is more politics, and the solutions that we kind of are posing to all of this stuff is a little bit more spiritually based, and requires everyday people to kind of confront what has been happening. And then if it changes your political beliefs, sure, that's fine, and that can happen. But it feels like there is a, I'm confused why people spend so much of their time sad in terms of Afghanistan as opposed to hope. That's one thing. But anger, why aren't you people angry that your why can't I fucking say this word? Rulers are constantly selling you out. Like over and over again. Why aren't you angry that our resources are being thrown away? Why aren't you angry that we've had poverty even back during the time that you heard was so lovely from your parents, because your parents had a lovely situation? There was 13 other million people dying of starvation then. Like, and that's when our population was smaller. So what I'm confused about is when you have to go through all these steps to then be able to confront it in a way that's like, here, I actually want to fix something. If you have too much internal struggle about being a victim, how are you going to ever listen to someone else's story when they're the victim in that story? And unless we can't do that, we're not going to be able to get anywhere. We talk big game about, oh, that person was a watan furush, that person was a beghairat. But actually, we're all beghairats because we've let all of this shit happen over and over again without one of us just stopping and being like, wait a second, look at the bigger picture. There's all these people playing us against each other. Why don't we stop and not let them win? You know?
Yeah.
Exactly,
I
exactly.
how your reactions you guys are
I
hearing
did.
here.
I have received a question, and I'm just going to remind them we will take all those questions at the very end. Bahai. So before we get into your spiritual solution part, would you like to give us some insight about what has been spoken out about a lot? Perhaps it's been less spoken about from my platform, but I can only do my part, and I cannot really focus on a lot of things at once. That's my weakness. Give us something about specifically these genocides committed in Afghanistan on, and I'm going to correct myself, the minoritized communities or ethnicities.
Mm-hmm.
Are you being sarcastic? Because someone threw a fit the other day about this minoritized word.
Yeah, well, today it's your stage, so I'm just gonna go with the flow. No,
did I convince you?
No,
Yeah.
no. But if you want to use this opportunity for that, or maybe focus on the broader picture, it's all yours. Give us some insight into that, because I think this is one of the very important factors of this whole topic.
Yeah. So I think this the genocide that occurred, Abdurrahman Khan. When people hear the word genocide, they're often reminded of the Holocaust and of Jewish people and Hitler. But there's actually, not everyone who's committing genocide necessarily has the same mentality as Hitler. They might be committing it for different reasons, right? So in Stalin's case, Stalin also committed a genocide, but his idea of why he did it was different than Hitler's, right? And Abdurrahman Khan, in terms of his ideology, was more similar to Stalin than Hitler, because he was trying to create a very centralized state, and that's why centralization is a problem. And because of that, he would massacre people who, in his opinion, would not allow him to not allow him to create that kind of centralized state. And because of that, he killed a lot of Hazaras and other ethnic groups, and he also killed a lot of Ghilji Pashtuns, because they were the more rural tribal Pashtuns, and they, even up to this day, like for example, the bulk of the Taliban is made up of them. They're the type that is most likely to revolt against the central government in Afghanistan. And I think that's why, centralization is a problem. And it's actually kind of ironic how we haven't learned that yet, because it's kind of funny how the Taliban, belong to the same ethnic group who were killed by Abdurrahman Khan, but now they are trying to emulate him in terms of how they want their government to be, despite, having their forefathers, they were killed by that kind of government. You know what I mean? So it's just like the cycle keeps repeating, and people don't even.
So when did it start initially? How did it spread? And more specifically, how did they, how do you call that, God, my English, I wish I had gone to university for 4 years, but I did go for 2 though. I did go for 2. But how did they actually, let's just say, move them to some other areas, or actually giving them another land or something, or transferred them?
Yeah. So a lot of people actually that Abdurrahman Khan favored Pashtuns by giving them lands to settle in the north. Actually, it wasn't, it wasn't that he was being nice. He would forcefully remove Ghiljis from their lands. He didn't want them to all be concentrated around each other, because then they would be more powerful. He would forcefully remove them and then send them to the north and tell them that you have to live here now, because he didn't want them all living in the same place.
And then they resettled. There you go. The mind of old man.
So, you know, other ethnic groups in Afghanistan might see that as favoritism, but at the same time, what was happening to these Pashtuns that were forcefully being taken to the north, it was actually also displacement for them. They weren't given the option, oh, do you want to go there? They were forcefully being taken there, right? And these are the nuances we have to remember.
Yes, please.
But
Shamaljan is on fire. Okay, let's
but
go.
we also can't forget the fact that whether his intention was that he was, you know, probably suffering from like power, like mental issues of, because he was so paranoid about it, that he ended up putting in place something that, while he may not have used it as much, people who shared his lineage did, which is that moving all these people around then made majority Pashtun areas where there didn't used to be, thus providing a foundation for Pashtunifying that area more. I want to make sure that we're all aware of this, that if there, the Hazara genocide that happened has become so covered up and so not spoken about, that now 100 years later, instead of people being like, we remember this day, and not just Hazara people, other people in Afghanistan being like, we remember this day, we know this history, we know why, etc., etc., things happen afterwards. People don't know it. It's erased out of history books. It's the books that are written about it are burned. It's completely wiped from the history, which then makes it harder to teach people in hindsight, especially now with how much shit is going on in Afghanistan, because again, people can't think about something that happened that was atrocious 100 years ago, even though we should be able to, because we need to confront that to see how it affected everything else through this 100 years since it happened. But people can't even focus on that atrocity because they're too busy living the one they're in right now. And this is just like it's compounding itself on itself, and it's just making it worse and worse. And then when you have a group of people, like when you have Americans coming and putting in puppet governments, and they're doing things in a way that's very reminiscent of how they handle their problematic shit in their countries, things become respectability politics. I've heard, I can't tell you how many people I've heard say this. Why are Hazara people complaining? There's people in government that are Hazara. Oh, really? So that undoes the genocide that happened and all of the repercussions of it? Like, again, it's just this divide and conquer thing.
I also think that the side becomes exploited by, especially about, so I am a little bit critical of, you know, the the Khorasani movement, because it is, at the end of the day, in my opinion, it is actually not any different than, you know, Pashtun supremacy. And I might be told that, you know, that's not the case, but we have to be, you know, honest with ourselves. The whole idea of like the Khorasani movement is based on creating a nation state that favors the Tajik population, you know, and they often exploit things such as the Hazara genocide for the reason for why it should exist. Meanwhile, they, you know, I feel like the suffering of Hazaras gets exploited, you know, by this movement, and when at the same time, you know, like I have, you know, like Tajik family members and things like that. Deep down, they also look down on Hazara people, and you know, it won't really be a solution for the discrimination and the marginalization that's happening to, you know, people in Afghanistan who are not Tajik or Pashtun. And we have to accept that, yes, the Pashtun supremacy exists, but there is also a different kind of supremacy that also exists. And that's the Tajik urban elite kind of supremacy, right? And all the Pashtun monarchs, while they were also Pashtun supremacists, they were also at the same time carried sentiments of, Tajik Persian supremacy, because maternally they all had Tajik ancestry. They were all Farsi Zuban, and they would look down on anybody, whether that's Uzbek, or rural Pashtuns who speak Pashto or Hazaras. They would look down on them for not, representing the ideal urban Farsi Zuban elite. You know what I mean? And these are discussions that, we need to actually have in our community. I've been in Memanis where these, very Kabuli Farsi Zuban elite, if there is someone there who might be, let's say a Pashtun from a rural area or an Uzbek from a rural area, they look down on them, and that's something, while Pashtun supremacy exists in Afghanistan, the particular form of it that exists is actually, the Mohammedzai elite kind of Pashtun supremacy. Like if you go to Kandahar, like a village with, these rural Pashtuns, they are not necessarily privileged. The privilege that is given to Pashtuns is actually given to a certain class of Pashtuns, right? So, and that certain class of Pashtuns are the ones, if, you were to meet them, they belong to the kind of Persianite culture of Afghanistan. So there's a lot of nuances involved in all of this, but people like to think of it in this black and white way. And I think that, yeah.
Also, I'm happy you said something about this. Let's remember how hierarchy works. Someone is at the lowest part of the hierarchy and another person is at the top. The people in the middle benefit from keeping the people at the bottom, and it not flipping and it being them. So every single ethnic group can also participate in the mentality of putting down another ethnic group because it suits them, and I don't think that's spoken about enough, because we can call it ethnofascism or a lineage that started with Pashtun rulers. I think I'm going to forever not be able to say this word. But at the end of the day, every other ethnic group is so happy that it's not their ethnic group. And at some point, they're going to have to sit with that thought and sit with the fact that they benefit from Hazara people being the ones who were genocided or taken the land back from. We have to be able to look at the intersect things, just like there's land taken from Hazaras, then now no one is talking about. Like, it's just swept under the rug. We're supposed to forget that happened, just like the genocide happened. But at the same time, I'm not comparing them, but I'm saying it's also indicative of intersections. Ethnic group being one, what about rural Pashtuns being used to fight wars for upper class Pashtuns who would never even fight in war because they're just going to use you? Like, why are you fighting for them? There's classism so deep in this country. It's not, our problem isn't just ethnic tension. It's also fucking classism. We have terrible classism in our country.
Yeah.
And then we also have the intersection of women and men and things like that.
Yeah. So like what you often see is like, when it comes to Pashtun supremacy, you see the Pashtun urban elite who don't even speak a word of Pashto. They use their Pashtun background as a way to appease the rural Pashtun populations, while at the same time exploiting them and looking down on them for not, fitting into that urban elite ideal. They make fun of them when they speak Farsi a certain way, or they don't only do this to Pashtuns, but I have a lot of Uzbek relatives too, and they have their own accent when they're speaking Farsi. They do this to anybody who doesn't fit that ideal. And we have to remember it's because the Persian urban elite in Afghanistan, they were the bureaucracy for the longest time. They were the representation of the gentle, civilized man in Afghanistan. Meanwhile, everyone else is the barbarian, Like, we have to, look at these things more deeply. And what I also have a problem, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, and it's not a coincidence that the children of these bureaucrats are now the ones selling the same shit, but they're doing it from their home in fucking
We keep losing her. She's just bringing in so many big matters that Instagram can't take it.
Can you hear? Can you see me?
Yeah.
We can hear you now. We can hear you now. You need to stop using the term. You need to stop using the term ruler, because that's the problem with your internet. It can't take it anymore. Okay.
No, it's every time that I want to say something important. All of these now
She was right.
they're still. Can you?
Okay. Again. Go ahead.
The same elites back in the day, the bureaucratic fucking elites, now their children go and spew the same shit all over the world, where they talk about how their own people are barbaric and somehow they're not because they're secular Muslims and they went to university in a fucking American fucking private school. Like, that's colonization. That's neo-colonialism. See, if everyone could just take a moment and remember that we shouldn't be each other's enemies and we should work together to actually fight our enemies instead of constantly creating more problems for ourselves. Like, do you know how, like, there's so many parts of this story that we don't even talk about. The fact that the wars for the past 50 years have built Iran. Who the fuck built Tehran? Migrants, mostly Azaras, but a lot of Afghans who were not allowed to be fucking anything in Iran. So we just, because of war and instability that our own people helped to create, we just helped a country get to somewhere where we need that in our country, not at the terrible levels of inhumanity that goes with a life as a refugee in Iran. Not that, because that part's terrible and no one talks about that, right? Afghans get treated like shit in Iran. If we could take that part away, but have some fucking stability so that our own people could make our own land and we could like work on this. How many Afghans fled in the past 40 years and work as only taxi drivers in the West?
Mm-hmm.
You're being slave of these people. And yes, partially it's not your fault, but these wars, the amount of things that avalanche out of it is so complicated. And the more we repeat it, the more millions and millions of more kids are just going to grow up to be slaves of other people's countries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, you know, like, even though people tend to say, like, from other countries like Pakistan and Iran, like, they look down on Afghan refugees, they see them as like a baggage. Well, when in reality they're actually free labor, almost they're slaves that they can use to build and develop their countries, right? So there is actually incentive to have refugees. You know, it means free labor. It's modern day slavery, and people don't realize that. Yeah.
This is, we have to be able to look at all of the situation in Afghanistan and also have some fucking knowledge about the world and its politics. Like, you have to know what colonial shit is and colonization. You have to know how to decolonize your mind. You have to know what capitalism is and how it runs and how it functions. It literally needs wars to be able to move the way it does, not just to get refugees to work jobs, because the arms industry is so fucking large. The humanitarian industry is so fucking large. These are, what is Afghanistan now? A narco state? What are we providing so much opium for? It's not all just going to the illegal market. We make all the pharmaceuticals that half the world is now addicted to, and it's making like a few families billions of dollars. This is why, like, what the fuck is the point of the word ghairat in our culture if we use it for the stupidest things? The hem of your mini skirt, ghairat ma. What, like, fuck that. What about ghairat that you're selling your own people into modern day slavery? You're letting the dancing and whatever joking of the past 20 years where, like, people, you guys need to realize that the past 20 years in Afghanistan wasn't fucking perfect. There was so many problems, and the quicker you get to understanding that, the better you will be at understanding the things that we have to do forward. How many more times will the everyday Afghan have to be like, that group of people killing people left and right, that group of people killing people left and right, raping people. Let's try that one out, because, like, maybe it will stop the other one. How many times have we done that? That's another repetition of history. Maybe this time with this new government, something will change. Just make the war stop. Just make all of this stop, right? And how many times does the everyday Afghan have to choose between shit and another piece of shit? You know?
Yeah.
I don't think it's making any sense. I'm getting very passionate about the situation.
No,
So,
it makes a lot of yes.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. I was saying I agree.
So if we have given insight into the whole discussion and topic and study that we have done, you mentioned pollution. You want to speak about that a little bit? Pollution. Where do you start? Solution.
Solution. Oh, okay. Well, number one, we have to do the age-old trick of being able to, right? We need to be able to sit and actually openly talk about something that's in our culture. That saying is in our culture because we used to do it, right? Like, we don't just make things up for no reason. That saying, if we could just talk about these things, right? Like, we've talked about Rwandan genocide before. Does everyone remember Rwandan genocide was happening like just a few years ago? How did they fix what happened between ethnic groups? They fucking sat together. Aisha told me about this. They got elders together. They got members of the society together on both sides, sat and fucking cried together. And now look at Rwanda. The ethnic tension is literally gone. It's gone.
Yeah, we have to make, efforts toward reconciliation. And part of that is, every party is guilty of killing innocent lives. We have to, one of the biggest problems I see in Afghanistan is that we always praise the first jihad movement, the Mujahideen with, Sayaf and Ahmad Shah Massoud, Rabbani, Gulbuddin, Mazari, all these people. We praise them because we think that, they were freedom fighters, but it's problematic to view it that way, because if they were truly freedom fighters, they would have let people vote for what they wanted, and Najibullah, when he was, in his UN compound, when he even he stepped down as the president of Afghanistan, he's like, why don't you guys do this democratically, vote, you don't have to fight. But no one wanted that, because everyone wanted to have a piece of Afghanistan for themselves. And it's really problematic that we see these people as role models, and when in truth, they could have gone about things very differently, which they obviously didn't do. And they laid the foundation for what's happening right now. The fact that we are praising this first jihad movement, like what happened during this time in Afghanistan, Russian soldiers in Afghanistan, they didn't die that much. It was Afghans killing Afghans, it was brothers killing brothers. In the same family, you had, Parshamis and Mujahideen, family members would kill each other. People forget how Hafizul Amin, I think it was Amin, and Sayaf or something, they were actually cousins. These were like family wars, you know, family killing family. And people need to like understand that, like, it's the Taliban today, the reason that they exist is because of the Mujahideen movement. You know, the reason that their jihad is valid is because of the first Mujahideen movement. And as long as we say that the first jihad was valid, that the first jihad was, you know, a good thing for Afghanistan, the Taliban also have legitimacy. And
You
yeah,
you bring
and that's
seconds of my delay. Go. Right, go ahead.
yeah, so it's very ironic to me when I see the same people who are, you know, pro Mujahideen in the 90s are now anti-Taliban. When if you look at, you know, the ideologies of these both of these movements, the fact that they're both born on this idea of jihad, where you're not actually killing, you know, invaders or whatever you want to call them. You're actually killing your own Muslims, you know, your own Afghans, you know, in what, you know, even though I don't consider myself a very religious person, you know, and if you, you know, even study Islam, where does it say to kill your own Muslim just because they might see things a little bit differently, right? There's no, you can't make a jihad like that valid, you know, it's not a valid, you know, and the first one, it was exactly like that. You know, people have this idea that the Afghans in Afghanistan who were socialists, like the Parchamis, yeah, we had bad apples, like the Hafizul Amin, you know, he was crazy. But the vast majority of the socialists, like even Najibullah, like all of these people, they were also practicing Muslims. It's not like they were not practicing. You know, they just had a socialist vision for Afghanistan. But, you know, one of the problems is that the rural population, you know, because of America and propaganda and brainwashing, they were led to believe that, oh, they're not Muslim, you know, and that wasn't done to, you know, it was a form of dehumanizing somebody else. You know, and it's often done in you know, these modern day jihads, like the ones that are happening in Afghanistan. You dehumanize the other person by perceiving them as an infidel instead of a Muslim, even if they pray 5 times a day. That's how you dehumanize them. And the jihad is based on this dehumanization of other people. And the first time that happened, you know, in recent history was with the Mujahideen dehumanizing other Afghans who didn't believe in their ideology. Yeah, Shamayel, you wanted to say something?
Sorry,
Go ahead.
I'm freaking out a little bit because I have to say this because there's so much that doesn't say this. Anytime this gets brought up, I have to talk about it. I talked about it on the live the other day with Pashana. Islam was used by white people to combat socialism and communism. That's the point, that the most religious person in Afghanistan sitting right now praying thinks one thing is the exact opposite of another thing because a white man put that in his head. A white man gave his brothers fucking millions and millions of dollars worth of weapons to go fight on the behalf of that ideology that's not even true. What the problem here is first of all, what Pashtun said in the other live, that Afghans inherently don't even know what they're practicing a lot of the time, right? And that's not a judgment. That's like they cannot read Arabic, so they cannot see what's in the Quran, et cetera, or things being passed down orally, and things getting lost in that, whatever. But at the same time, if you're going to run around being proud of the first jihad and, oh, we didn't let kafirs take us over, well, apparently they took over your mind for you to go and kill your own people over something that doesn't exist. Islam isn't antithetical to leftist politics. If you have the only to put it on a personal level, and I'm not the only person that feels this way, my socialism is because I have faith. It's because I have faith. It's because I do have hope for humanity and I have love for human beings. I wouldn't be a socialist if I didn't have faith in a higher power that never said anything that we should kill each other, that we should not live in harmony, that we shouldn't have access to the things that we want, that we shouldn't dream and be able to self-actualize. Like, how does that make any fucking sense?
Yeah.
You know? And again, this is another moment where it's cute and cheeky to be like, I'm a Taliban apologist because it's anti-American imperialism. No, it's not. Who made the Taliban? Who made their ideology, down to their ideology? They didn't just give them and fucking books. They gave them the ideology.
Yeah, definitely. You know, a lot of people don't understand that Islam can exist within a socialist framework. And, you know, a good example of this is the Khuda Khidmatgar movement that was led by Abdul Ghaffar Khan. He was left-wing and he was a socialist, but at the same time, he was a deeply pious and devout man, you know, and that's why his movement was called Khuda Khidmatgar, right? And it's because, like you said, the America has brainwashed, you know, Afghans and other Muslim regions around the world into believing that in order to be a good Muslim, you cannot have left-wing politics. You know, Islam is all, you know, Islam is always portrayed as a religion that can only exist within right-wing politics, and it's perceived as conservative, you know, more conservative leaning, when that's not necessarily the case, you know. And it's a very new phenomenon. You know, back in the day, you know, before you know, Western imperialism, you know, Afghanistan, the Middle East, all these areas, they had people here had a very different mindset, and that's why you had people like Rumi, Hafiz, you know, all these people. If they existed today, they would see themselves as socialists because they were, you know, very concerned about, you know, the working class, the poor. They had a lot of, you know, compassion and love for them, and that's why even, you know, one of the oldest socialist, like communist, you know, if you can call it a communist movement, in the region was created and by a Sufi like Pir Roshan, like I mentioned. So it's very problematic that we now, Afghans think when they hear something like, you know, communism or socialism, immediately they think atheism. And I think a lot of that has to do with Russian imperialism, like Soviet, you know, the Soviet Union. You know, like communism predates Russia. It predates Karl Marx. It is indigenous, you know. It's, you know, back when you looked at people who lived in, you know, these tribal societies, they had, you know, their framework was built in their own indigenous form of communism. Karl Marx, in fact, he looked at these societies, and that's where he found his inspiration. We need to stop perceiving, you know, socialism, communism as things created by white people. They're not. In fact, they culturally appropriated them, and they, you know, watered them down. And that's why, you know, the Soviet Union was not a good representation of communism, because they the framework within which it was made was not based on indigenous communism. It was based on a white man's vision of what it should be, you know. And that's why it didn't work out too well. And people need to realize that, like, just, you know, just because okay, Muslims love to say this, you know, Islam is a peaceful religion, Muslims are moderate. The Taliban are not a good example of Islam. ISIS is not a good example of Islam. Meanwhile, when it comes to communism, everyone's says, no, the Russians are an example of communism. You know, like you can't have these, like, it's hypocrisy, you know, when it comes to yourself. No, you're not like ISIS or the Taliban. You're a moderate Muslim. Islam is not what they're practicing. But when it comes to stuff like communism or left-wing thought, the only government that becomes representative of that is the Soviet Union. And I think that's problematic.
Exactly.
That's a perfect point.
Exactly.
And it touches the fact that,
there are some I'm sorry, there are some really weird robotic voice messages just going through at the same time. I don't know where they're coming from, whatever. But so first of all, I'm going to take these questions. So Yamajan says, yes, Blingy and Bulbul, obviously. Yes, Blingy and Bulbul. There's another friend of ours. There's perhaps fire or hot energy. My cousin and understand love the strong female energy for sure. Again, kudos to you too. So that's definitely Bulbul's cousin, Aisha's cousin for sure. And then we have two messages from Blingistan saying, can you send me a request, please? It won't let me in. Okay, but you are. All right, so yes.
I just want to say something because of what Aisha said. We have to stop being hypocrites. You know what I mean? Afghans have a problem with hypocrisy. The way that the American puppet government of the past 20 years sold out their people, so did, to a certain extent, the Taliban, and so did rural rulers in the 1950s. Like, can we see that thread is being played over and over again? Hypocrisy. Something's Muslim and another thing's not Muslim. And then to communism. For fuck's sake, the internet.
So very quickly, hopefully you have been able to put your point out and you've been able to talk about some of the things that you want to talk about. No? Oh, you haven't?
No, we had deep things to talk about.
Okay. Then we
had really deep stuff to
do. Then we can definitely organize another final chat for the sixth time for sure. But for now, what you're going to give us out of all this beautiful and very constructive, informative discussion that we have had, very learning experience for sure. What you're going to give us as bullet points for today talk as solutions in bullet points. If each of you could take turns and give our people some bullet points.
I think one of the main points that I would give based on today's lecture. I don't this, but like discussion, I mean.
With the ruler.
I think, you know, Afghans need to understand that they've been repeating the same mistakes throughout history because instead of, you know, because they blindly believe, you know, in the religious clergy in their country, and instead of, you know, having their own connection, forming their own connection with God. And this wasn't always, you know, the case in the past. You know, when I look at my elders, they were much more mystical and spiritual, and they understood that, you know, you know, mullahs were kind of the butt of jokes at one point in Afghanistan. But like, especially now, you know, the problem has become that people take them too seriously now. And also, another point that I think is important for us to remember is to remember that, you know, no matter what Afghan group you belong to, you know, we're all guilty of, you know, being related to or being part of the problem. And, you know, like the Mujahideen, the first Mujahideen movement that happened in Afghanistan, you know, everybody was involved in that, like Pashtuns, Tajiks, every ethnic group. You know, we were all involved in doing something horrible to our own people. And even, you know, the Khalqis, even they fucked up, you know, like obviously they were also guilty. Like we all have blood on our hands, and we are all hypocrites, especially the ones who will say, oh, Islam, you know, the kind of Islam being practiced by the Taliban and by ISIS is not the Islam we practice. We're moderate Muslims. And at the same time, they will, you know, tell someone who's a socialist or a communist or, you know, has left-wing politics, oh, you can't be, your politics are wrong. You can't be a morally righteous person, you can't be a good Muslim, because, you know, the only type of communists are, you know, the communists who were from Soviet Union. So I think it's really important for us to see the ways in which we are hypocritical, like in ourselves. Like even I'm sure even I have a lot of hypocritical attributes, and that's the thing with Afghans. There's a lot of hypocrisy in our community.
Shamayel John, the ruler of the term ruler, what do you have? Ruler.
Ruler. Okay. My points. If you are a Muslim listening to this, you just think, what in your faith, what about you and your faith would make you think that every single human being having food to eat, a house over their head, access to anything they wanted in terms of education and healthcare, and the ability to actualize their dreams, tell me why these four things goes against your faith. I want to know from you, the people who perpetuate this myth, number one. Number two, please embrace not just your culture on a surface level, but deeper, which includes the history. Don't center you and your victimization story. Be open to hearing other people's. And while you're at that, go ahead and unpack your own trauma, the trauma that you've inherited intergenerationally, and start working on those things. I mentioned this as one of the examples often. If you are an Afghan woman who thinks all Afghan men are terrible, you need to sit and unpack that you have one trauma, or maybe multiple, but you have a trauma from a Afghan man that is clouding your judgment on 35 or half of 35 million people, right? Like that's one example. Get angry that your people are being used as cogs for other people, and your own people sold you out to that. You are the slaves in the West. You are the opium growers in our own country. Why? Why are you being used as a pawn? Why are you allowing yourself to be used as a pawn? And lastly, just take into account how Afghanistan and its problems have been used to help others, not ourselves, but others, and how it's caused ripple effects through the whole world. Don't be oblivious to the fact that Afghanistan might be small. It might be only a tragedy to you because you're 25 and you haven't lived through extra amounts of decades with Afghanistan on your mind. But we have been used to bring about new changes in global politics over and over again. The British lost 3 times in Afghanistan, and then years later, the British Raj fell. The USSR fought in Afghanistan, and then 2 years later, it fell. Like, if that's not showing you enough, like, we are being used. So instead of playing to the hands of the people who do not want your people's success, they do not want your people to thrive, instead of playing to their hands like fucking, I don't even know, dogs, like what even is the word? You're just letting them walk all over us. Instead of doing that, go back and look at things so you're prepared to know and help in a way that doesn't keep letting our enemies win over and over again. And for the love of God, stop using stupid myths on us. Graveyard of myths. Yeah, how are we a graveyard of myths graveyard of empires, when our fucking ruler sold us out? That's how we became graveyards of empires. When we were graveyards of empires like thousands of years ago, that's a different story. But in the past 300 years, we haven't done fucking shit. It's not a graveyard. The only graveyard we have is our own country. It's dying. I think that's enough of bullet points for me.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much for giving us your precious time. Both of you, early morning for Aisha John there. Thank you very much for taking the time for us. I know we both know you have been very busy with your own studies. And Shamayel, thank you very much for giving us your precious time. We know you've been pretty busy with your own, a lot of things that you have on your hand right now, your books and your business and all your other priorities that you have. So thank you very much for all. There isn't really a lot for me to say here. Obviously, there isn't anything for me to say here. But I'll very simply say, from a very simple person to simple people out there, in simple words, is that it's infamous code in the Islamic world when they say, if you want to talk to your God, go pray. If you want to listen to your God, go read his book. So that's a very most simplistic way to connect to your Lord and to your God, and to listen and to talk to him directly. That's the direct line, that's the direct connection you have. No need for the people in between, because the people in between are humans just like us. They can be corrupt. Secondly, sharing and caring and sacrifices, just like for your own people, hello Kitty, is a human nature. It has been embedded and shouldn't be seen as a very extreme ideology. We all are humans, and we're called humans because of the human nature, which is sharing, which is caring for each other, which is living together in unity and peace, understanding each other. Learning history is very important for all of us, especially the young generation. If we don't do it now, when will we? Because we are losing. We're losing people. We are losing our country, our nation, our identity, our culture. So learn your history, and we get to carry it forward, regardless of the regime changes that falls. New one will come, the other will fall. But if you want to do something about it, start learning your history. Thank you very much. That was my last intake, and all the great knowledge that I've learned today beautifully. Thank you very, very much. Hope to do another final chapter very soon. Somewhere soon, not very soon, but very, very soon, because we have to be careful about the schedule of our masters here. So, Amal John from Afghanistan, thank you very, very much. Aisha from the Bulbul of Afghanistan, after Ahmad Zahir, of course, and I know you can sing very well. You've got the whole Nagma look going, beautifully done. Thank you very much. Hope you have a great day. Hope you have a great evening. I'm going to go and get some sleep before I wake up again in 3 hours.
Thank you, guys.
So thank you very much. Love you too. God bless. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Out.
Allah.
Lots of love.
Bye.